People didn't ask what happened. They didn't reach out. They didn't check in. They filled in the silence with rumors. She burned out. She had a meltdown. She threw away everything for, what, a hobby? No one came to me for the truth. They just passed around the easy version of my story. My name is Ava Moreno. I'm 31 years old. I live on a narrow walk-up above a bodega in Denver, the kind where the garbage trucks bang at 6 a.m. and the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor sneeze. No nameplate, no business card, just one quiet truth. I walked away from what my family once called the American dream. I brew my own coffee. I split utilities with my upstairs neighbor. And somehow I'm still the family's biggest disappointment. I was supposed to be the one who made it. Stanford undergraduate full ride to Columbia Medical. White coat ceremony photos framed on the wall. For a while, I was everything they hoped for. I was the brag, the walking resume. And then I wasn't. I dropped out in my second year, quietly, no scene, no breakdown. Just a slow collapse that started with sleepless nights and ended with me staring at an anatomy textbook I couldn't open without crying. It wasn't about failing. I was passing. I was performing. But I was fading out, quietly, daily, without anyone noticing. My smile still worked at Christmas dinner, so they assumed I was fine. I wasn't. So I left. My dad said nothing. My mom called it a pause when talking to her friends. My brother Marco moved on and filled the space I left. Business degree, management job, new apartment with granite countertops. The family found a new success story to cling to. And me? I started helping people in my neighborhood log into their email. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't a comeback. It was something to do, something that didn't demand I be exceptional, something that felt real. It started with one woman, a former librarian named Jean, 78, who hadn't video called her sister since before the pandemic. Her daughter gave her a tablet. She couldn't figure it out. I helped. Then I helped her friend, then another. Then the church across the street asked if I could teach a Saturday class. Then it clicked. These weren't one-offs. This was a need no one was talking about. So I built it, not all at once, not with a pitch deck or investors, just piece by piece. A website, a library partnership, then a full digital platform. I called it BrightLoop. It wasn't revolutionary, it was respectful. We taught seniors how to FaceTime, how to use Google Maps, how to check lab results through a health portal, how to avoid email scams. We didn't just teach tech, we gave people their independence back. It grew slowly, then suddenly. Within 3 years, BrightLoop had 80,000 users. We were in libraries, veteran centers, senior homes. No marketing budget, no viral video, just word of mouth and genuine connection. But at home, none of it mattered. To my family, I was still the girl who quit. Still the one who couldn't handle med school, still the free spirit. They didn't know I was running webinars for counties that didn't have broadband access 5 years ago. They didn't ask, not once. Last month at dinner, my mom smiled across the table and said to Marco's fiancée, "Marco's always been the driven one." Then turned to me and said like a punch wrapped in silk, "Ava's creative. She marches to her own beat." I smiled, took a bite of green beans, didn't say a word. Because that's what disappointments do. We eat quietly. We smile through it, we swallow what we really want to say. But the thing about building something in silence is, eventually, it gets too big to ignore. And it all started to shift with a single email from someone who had no idea who I was. Not yet. But they were about to. I didn't plan for any of it. BrightLoop wasn't born from a business model. It didn't start with a pitch or a mentor or some carefully outlined roadmap. It started with frustration, with someone's grandma crying because she couldn't log into Facebook to see her grandson's graduation photos. It started with Jean. She was my first regular. She came to the library every Saturday wearing her I read banned books tote and clutching a dog-eared notebook full of questions. What's the difference between Wi-Fi and Bluetooth? Why do people put hashtags on everything? How do I know if an email is fake? She asked without shame. And she listened like every answer mattered. Helping her made me feel something I hadn't felt in years, useful. Not just efficient or competent, actually useful. She brought her neighbor the following week, then her cousin, then a woman from her bowling league. I bought a whiteboard and borrowed a projector from a friend who taught high school biology. By month 3, the library was offering me a small stipend and a spare room with folding chairs and bad lighting. I said yes. It was far from glamorous, but it was mine. And something strange started happening. I stopped checking my LinkedIn. I stopped flinching when someone asked me what I did. I didn't have a title, not really. But for the first time, I wasn't faking it. By the end of that first year, I'd taught over 200 seniors, one at a time, class by class, question by question. So I decided to build something they could access anytime, a platform that wasn't designed for techies, but for people who felt like technology had left them behind. I used YouTube tutorials and late-night trial-and-error coding. I stayed up until 2 a.m. watching videos on user interface design. I paid a student at the local community college $200 to build me a prototype with extra large buttons and text scaling built in. We called it BrightLoop because that's what it felt like I was looping people back into conversations, back into community, back into confidence. The features were simple, big, clean layout, voice instructions, step-by-step walkthroughs, nothing hidden behind 5 tabs or tiny icons. We launched in the spring with 73 users, mostly folks I already knew by name. I watched them log in like kids opening a toy for the first time, carefully, joyfully, a little scared. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And then it started to spread. Church groups picked it up. A local senior center emailed me asking if we could do a demo. I said yes, not even knowing how I'd make it work, but I figured it out. The second year, we hit 12,000 users. I started keeping a folder of the testimonials that made me cry. One woman said, "I can finally order my prescriptions online without bothering my son." A veteran wrote, "I got to watch my granddaughter sing in her school play, and I didn't feel like a ghost." Another said simply, "You made me feel capable again." And I was proud, quietly, fiercely, in a way I didn't need to explain to anyone. But I didn't talk about it at home. Not once. Not at family dinners, where Marco would go on about market growth and IPOs while Mom nodded like she understood every word. Not when my aunt asked how I was doing and then changed the subject before I could answer. Not when my mom looked at me across the table and asked, "So, any thoughts about going back to school?" I just smiled. "Still figuring it out," I said. But I wasn't figuring it out. I was building something, and one night it finally caught up with me. It was late, nearly midnight. I was going through the inbox, replying to messages from users, checking feedback on a new tutorial we'd launched that week. Subject line, testimonial submission, submitted by T. Caldwell. I clicked, expecting another short paragraph and maybe a blurry photo. Instead, a video began to play. A young woman sat in a softly lit room, holding hands with an older man. Her voice was gentle, but clear. "This is my grandpa Walter. Last year, after my grandma passed, he barely left the house. He didn't know how to do anything online, couldn't even text. We were all worried he'd disappear into his grief. Then someone told us about BrightLoop." She smiled. "Now he sends the whole family emails. He FaceTimes me every Sunday. He even helped his neighbor get into online banking. It gave him his confidence back. It gave us him back." My throat closed. My hands went still on the trackpad. I watched the video twice, then 3 more times. Each time a little slower, a little more stunned. By the fifth time, I noticed her name on the submission form, Talia Caldwell. Caldwell, Marco's fiancée. I froze, screen still glowing, laptop fan humming quietly like breath in a dark room. She had no idea who built the platform, didn't recognize the name, didn't connect me, but she believed in the work. She trusted it, shared it, used it to bring her grandfather back to life. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding, and stared at the ceiling. Not because I wanted praise, not even recognition, but because for the first time in years, someone this close to my family had seen the truth. Not the free spirit, just the work, and she loved it. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't need rest. I needed to hold on to that voice, the one that said, softly, honestly, "Thank you." It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about something better. It was about finally being seen, not because I demanded it, but because the truth I'd built could no longer be ignored, not even by them. The night I saw Talia Caldwell's name, I sat in front of my laptop until sunrise. I didn't answer any emails. I didn't touch my tea. I just stared at the screen, watching her video again and again. Not for validation, but because it did something to me I hadn't felt in a long time. It made me feel understood, even if she didn't know it was me. Talia, my brother Marco's fiancée, the one with the sleek bob and finance degree, the one my mother had already mentally adopted, had unknowingly held a mirror up to everything I'd been building in silence. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. Her words were pure, honest, grateful. She had no idea the person she was thanking was the same woman who'd been dismissed as finding herself over pot roast every Sunday. And maybe that was what made it hit harder. She believed in the work, not the resume, not the image, just the results. That week, I didn't tell anyone, not my team, not my volunteers, not even my best friend Naomi, who'd been helping me run BrightLoop's social media for over a year. I carried it quietly, like a secret I wasn't ready to speak aloud. But the secret had its own plans. The following Saturday, I got a text from my mom. Reminder, engagement dinner next weekend at 7. Dress nice, no jeans. Talia's family is traditional. I stared at it for a long time. No jeans. As if that was the only thing keeping me from being presentable. I considered not going. What would be the point? I knew how it would go. I'd be seated at the far end of the table where no one would ask me real questions. I'd smile, nod, and listen to my mother brag about Marco's new promotion. I'd be introduced as Marco's sister, Ava. She's doing something online with older folks. Like I was running a hobby blog. But something in me shifted. A flicker of defiance maybe. Or pride. Or just the slow burn of enough is enough. I didn't RSVP. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. And all week I kept hearing Talia's voice from that video in my head. You gave us him back. That meant something. Not to them, not yet, but to me. On the night of the engagement dinner, I got dressed slowly. Not in jeans and not in what my mom would have picked either. I wore a deep navy wrap dress, elegant, unfussy, and mine. I slipped a USB into the inside pocket of my bag. On it was a single file, Talia's testimonial video. I didn't plan to show it, I just wanted to carry it, like armor. The restaurant was high-end, all dark wood and glowing lights, the kind of place where entrees didn't come with prices on the menu. I arrived 10 minutes early. My mother looked surprised when she saw me. "Oh, you came." "You asked me to," I said calmly. "Well, good," she said, adjusting her bracelet. "Let's keep the focus on Marco tonight, okay? His promotion's a big deal." I smiled. Of course. As always, I was seated near the end of the table, far from the toasts, the camera angles, the center of attention. Talia arrived 15 minutes later, beaming in a silver dress that probably cost more than my laptop. She made the rounds, hugging aunts, shaking hands with uncles. When she got to me, she smiled politely and said, "Hi, Ava, right?" I nodded. "Hi." She didn't recognize me, not yet, and I didn't push it. Dinner moved on. Speeches were made, Toasts clinked. Marco gave a 5-minute thank you that ended in a humble brag about quarterly numbers. My mom dabbed the corners of her eyes like he'd just won a Nobel. Then, over dessert, it happened. Talia turned to me casually, maybe just to be polite, and said, "I've been meaning to ask, what do you do again?" The table quieted just slightly. Not obviously, just a subtle shift, the way attention changes when everyone pretends they're not eavesdropping. My mother's spine went straight. Marco stiffened beside her. I took a sip of water, set my glass down. "I run a digital literacy platform for older adults. It's called BrightLoop." Talia blinked. "Wait, BrightLoop? As in the tutorials with the big buttons and voice guides?" I nodded once. "That's the one." She froze. Slowly, her hand went to her mouth. Her eyes widened. No way. You're the founder?" My mother tensed so hard I could feel it across the table. "You built BrightLoop?" Talia asked again, louder now. "As in, the platform that helped my grandpa FaceTime us every Sunday?" All eyes turned. I nodded again. "Yes." For a moment there was silence. The real kind. Not polite, not passive. Stunned. "My God," she said, blinking fast. "I submitted a video to your campaign. My grandfather, Walter Caldwell. He used your site every week until he passed. It changed his whole life. You changed our lives." My throat tightened. "I saw it. Your video. It meant a lot." Talia stood up. "Why didn't you say anything? You're doing something incredible." I shrugged. "Wasn't the right time." She turned to the table. "I don't think you all understand. This woman built a national platform from scratch. She's not just doing something online, she's changing lives." No one knew what to say. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Marco stared at his wine glass like it might save him. I looked around the table, all those people who thought they knew me, who never asked. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the afterthought. I felt seen. Not because I begged for it, not because I demanded respect, but because the truth finally stood up in the room and refused to sit down. The table never fully recovered after Talia's outburst. Her words didn't just echo, they rearranged the air. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to make the moment less awkward. I didn't rush in to soften it. I didn't apologize. I just sat still, letting it hang, letting them absorb it. Talia slowly sat back down, cheeks flushed, still looking at me like she couldn't believe it. Marco was quiet. Too quiet. My mother, who had just minutes earlier complimented the chef on the beurre blanc, sat with a fixed smile and a tight jaw, like she was recalibrating reality in real time. "So," Talia said gently, trying to break the silence, "why didn't you ever mention it?" I looked at her, really looked at her. "Because no one ever asked." That hit harder than I expected. Not just for her, for everyone at the table. It wasn't a bitter answer, it was a fact, and they all knew it. It's not that I wanted applause, it wasn't about being the center of attention. I'd gotten used to invisibility. I had learned how to shrink, how to keep peace by staying quiet. But when you build something real, when you help thousands of people reconnect with their families, find their voice again, reclaim their independence, you stop wanting to disappear. You want your work to speak. And that night it finally did. After that, dinner turned into something else. No more toasts, no more smug updates from Marco about his company's new client, no more sidelong glances and gentle corrections about what I was up to these days. People started whispering, not behind my back, but toward me. "Ava, tell me more about BrightLoop. How many people use it now? Do you work full-time on it?" My dad could use something like that. For once, I wasn't explaining. I was being asked. It didn't erase everything that came before, the silence, the assumptions, the shame, but it cracked the shell wide open. By the time dessert arrived, I was exhausted in the best way. I got up quietly, told Talia thank you, and meant it, and slipped out before the check came. I didn't want to hear anyone say good job. Not that night. I walked home in the cold Denver air, coat collar up, heart racing, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Not just the reveal, not just the stunned silence, but the shift. The way my family looked at me, like they had to rearrange me in their minds, like I was no longer the one who left, but the one who did something with leaving. The next morning, my phone buzzed at 7:12 a.m. It was a text from Marco. I didn't know. I should have asked. No emojis, no excuses. Just that. I stared at it for a full minute before setting the phone down, screen face down, and letting the silence speak for once. Around noon, my mom called. Twice. I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because I knew the call would be laced with politeness, pride repackaged as support, and subtle attempts to regain control of the narrative. I didn't want to give her the chance to minimize it. Not this time. The following day, I walked through a grocery store, earbuds in, and someone tapped my shoulder. A woman, mid-40s, kind eyes, slightly frazzled. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Ava Moreno?" I hesitated. "Yes?" "Oh my God," she said, grinning. "My mom uses BrightLoop. She's obsessed. Sends us gifts now. She thinks she's hilarious." I laughed. "That's amazing." She squeezed my hand. "You gave her confidence again. Thank you." I nodded, thanked her, and walked out into the sun, blinking like it was the first time I'd ever felt warmth on my face. That kind of moment? That didn't just come from coding or branding. It came from every person I taught how to hold a phone, every question I answered 10 times without flinching, every email from someone saying, "I didn't think I could do this, but now I can." Back home, I opened my laptop and scrolled through BrightLoop's dashboard. New signups, new feedback, a message from a library in New Mexico asking to partner, another from a senior home in rural Illinois. We were expanding, fast, and I was no longer afraid to let people see it. 2 days later, a handwritten letter arrived at my apartment in a cream-colored envelope with my mom's precise, looping handwriting. "Dear Ava, I watched the video Talia sent me. I cried. Not because I didn't know what you were building, but because I never asked. I was so focused on what you walked away from, I never stopped to see what you were walking toward. You've done what no one in this family ever had the courage to do. You failed, and you kept going. You helped people find their voice again, including me. Love, Mom." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and slid it into the back of my notebook. Not to display, not to frame, but to keep. I didn't need proof. I was already living it. That weekend, I gave a talk at a community center off Colfax. No live stream, no press, just 50 chairs and a projector screen. Most of the audience was over 60. They brought notebooks, they brought questions, they brought hope, and I gave them the truth. I told them I was never supposed to be here, that I was supposed to wear a white coat and speak in operating rooms. But life had other plans, and I finally stopped arguing with them. When I finished, they stood up to clap. I didn't cry, but I smiled. Not the tight smile I used to fake at family dinners, but the kind that reaches deep into your chest and says, "I'm not lost. I'm just not where they left me." That was the night I realized I didn't need a stage to be heard. I'd already built one. After the engagement dinner, something shifted in the way people looked at me. Not dramatically, but noticeably. It wasn't pity anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was curiosity. The story they'd been telling themselves, the one where I cracked under pressure and disappeared into obscurity, no longer held. I had cracked, but not in the way they thought. And I hadn't disappeared. I'd just built something too real, too needed, too undeniable to stay in the dark. The following week, I received an email from the Office of the Colorado Library Commission. They wanted to pilot BrightLoop in 10 rural branches across the state, places with weak Wi-Fi, aging desktops, and more cows than Chromebooks. Places where older folks had long been left behind, not out of neglect, but because no one thought they could keep up. They could. They just hadn't been given the chance. I replied yes, of course. Then sat at my desk for a long time staring at the message, not because I didn't believe it was real, but because this kind of opportunity used to feel miles away. Now, it was showing up in my inbox. And the irony wasn't lost on me. My mother once said, "You could have been anything." I was starting to believe I already was. At Sunday dinner that week, I showed up early. Not to prove a point, just because I felt like it. I brought a bottle of wine. I wore what I wanted: black jeans, a rust-colored blouse, ankle boots. Nothing flashy, but I didn't dress to blend in either. My mom opened the door and blinked. "You're early." "Yeah," I said. "Wanted to help." She moved aside to let me in, and I could tell she didn't quite know how to respond. We'd always been polite, distant, like two people in the same family who were afraid of setting off an alarm no one knew how to disarm. Dinner was normal. Almost. Marco talked about wedding logistics. Talia chimed in with cake samples and flower arrangements. My mom asked if we wanted more roasted potatoes. But this time, when someone said, "How's work, Ava?" it didn't feel like an afterthought. I talked about the pilot program, about the partnership with the libraries, about the new accessibility tools we were developing: screen reader integration, voice navigation, multilingual tutorials. My mom didn't interrupt. Marco didn't scoff. Talia nodded like she understood more than I said aloud. It wasn't a celebration, but it was respect. And for once, that was enough. Later that week, I was meeting with a potential intern, a 19-year-old design student named Eli. We met at a coffee shop off South Broadway. He had a notepad full of questions and a head full of messy curls. "So, BrightLoop's whole thing is designed for people who didn't grow up with tech?" "Exactly," I said. "No assumptions, no pressure, just guidance." He scribbled notes, eyes wide. "That's so cool. I didn't even think about stuff like that." We talked about design ethics, aging populations, and what it means to build something for people instead of just at them. Midway through our chat, a woman at the next table leaned over. "Sorry to interrupt, but are you Ava Moreno?" I blinked. "Yes?" She lit up. "Oh my gosh. My dad uses your site. He sends me memes now. I didn't even know he knew what a meme was." I laughed. Eli looked at me like I'd just grown wings. "You didn't say people recognize you." "They usually don't," I said. "That's kind of the point." But it was starting to happen. Little moments, small acknowledgments. My name didn't matter. My work did. And that was more than I ever thought I'd want. That night, I lay in bed watching the lights flicker through my window blinds and thought about everything I used to believe. That success meant prestige. That purpose had to look a certain way. That walking away meant failure. But I hadn't failed. I'd redefined what success meant, not just for me, but for the people I served. And I was just getting started. A few days later, I got an email from a woman named Rachel Torres, a program director from a foundation in San Francisco. Her message was short, direct, and clear. "We've been following BrightLoop for a while. One of our fellows submitted your platform as a case study in digital equity. I think there's potential for national scale. Would love to talk about it." I stared at the screen. Rachel Torres wasn't just anyone. Her foundation backed women-led social impact startups across the country. If she believed in BrightLoop, doors would open, big ones. We set a date for a call. She asked smart questions. She had data, vision, clarity. And then, toward the end, she said, "One of our volunteers who flagged your work is connected to someone named Talia Caldwell. Any chance you know her?" I laughed. "Yeah, she's marrying my brother." Rachel paused, then smiled. "Small world." "Smaller every day," I said. When we hung up, I sat for a long time with the silence. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because the dominoes were still falling, quietly, cleanly. Everything I'd built in the shadows was stepping into the light, and I didn't flinch. Not anymore. That Sunday, as I left my parents' house, my mom walked me to the door. She didn't usually do that. She stood beside me on the porch, holding a glass of wine, watching the sun fade into the hills. "You always walked your own way," she said softly. "I used to think that meant you were lost." I turned to her. "Now I see you were just walking ahead." We didn't hug, but we stood there longer than we ever had. And that felt like enough. It's strange how quickly people start adjusting their memory when the story changes. Suddenly, the same relatives who once tiptoed around my name at family events were sharing BrightLoop articles on Facebook like they'd known all along. Suddenly, my mom's book club friends were so proud of me, even though most of them had believed I was just freelancing or taking time to regroup. But I wasn't angry about it. Not anymore. Because by the time they started changing the story, I no longer needed them to. I had my own, and it was bigger than any version they'd tried to write for me. 2 weeks after the phone call with Rachel Torres, I was standing in a rented workspace in Capitol Hill, Denver, running a strategy session with our new BrightLoop team. We had 5 staff now. 5. Not volunteers, not temp help, real employees, a curriculum lead, a community coordinator, 2 developers, and me. We had partnerships launching in 6 states, requests for pilot programs in 3 more. We were getting emails every day from teachers, senior centers, public housing directors. Our monthly newsletter had a 72% open rate. We just passed 250,000 users. I should have been overwhelmed, maybe even scared, but I wasn't. I felt ready. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. I had nothing to prove. But I did have more to give, and I wanted to give it well. That's what I told the team that morning as we prepped for our first national campaign launch. BrightLoop was never just about teaching tech, I said. It's about dignity. It's about showing people they're not too late, too old, or too far behind. That they still matter. That they can still grow. Everyone nodded. We called the campaign Digital Dignity. It would include workshops in public libraries, mobile hubs in rural counties, pop-up training events in underserved neighborhoods, free access, full support, no strings. It launched on a Monday. By Friday, we had 30 new press inquiries and a segment request from a local news station. By the end of the month, we were trending on Twitter, not because we'd gone viral, but because our mission had found its moment. People were hungry for purpose, for impact, for something real. And that's what we had built. One night, I got an email from a 92-year-old woman in Montana. Subject line, "I flew for the first time today." Inside, she wrote, "Your platform helped me apply for a passport online. Today, I flew to see my great-granddaughter for the first time. I was scared, but I did it. Thank you for giving me the first step. I read it 3 times. Not for the praise, but for the truth in it. This was the kind of moment that didn't need applause. It just needed to exist." At Marco and Talia's wedding that spring, I wore a navy jumpsuit. My mother didn't blink. She introduced me to her friends without hesitation. "This is my daughter, Ava. She runs a national nonprofit." It wasn't exactly right, but it was close enough. I wasn't there to correct her. I wasn't there to shrink. I was just there to be present, fully, unapologetically. Finally. During the reception, under a canopy of string lights and the soft hum of a jazz trio, Marco walked over, hands in his pockets. A little awkward. "Talia told me you've been invited to speak at Google?" I nodded. "Next month." He looked down at his drink, then up at me. "You gonna brag about being my sister?" I smirked. "You gonna brag about being mine?" He grinned, and just like that, the past loosened its grip. 2 weeks later, I sent Marco and Talia a small package. Inside was a custom version of BrightLoop, tailored specifically for the assisted living facility where Talia's grandfather had spent his final years. Lifetime access, no fees, full support, no press release, no credit, just a handwritten note that read, "Some connections outlive misunderstanding. Thank you for helping mine find her voice." Talia called the next morning. She didn't say anything right away, just breathed. Then, voice shaking, she said, "You didn't have to." I smiled. "I know, that's why I did." Back home, I printed out a quote and taped it to my fridge. "They'll say you failed, until one day they ask how you did it. No name, no explanation, just truth." And beneath it, my reflection in the stainless steel. Clear, steady, whole. Not chasing permission anymore, not shrinking to fit anyone's comfort zone, not waiting to be seen. I'd already made myself visible, and the light wasn't coming from anyone else. It was mine all along. Summer came to Denver like it always does. bright, loud, unforgiving. By June, the sidewalks were too hot to touch, and the air felt like it had weight. But for the first time in years, I didn't mind the heat. I was too busy. BrightLoop was rolling out its digital dignity campaign in 12 states. We were working with libraries, schools, housing networks. We launched pop-up workshops in church basements, VFW halls, and tiny community centers with flickering fluorescent lights. Everywhere we went, we heard the same words. I thought I was too late. I thought I'd been left behind. Thank you for showing me I'm still capable. And every time, I nodded, smiled, and reminded them what I'd finally learned to believe for myself. You're never too late, not if you're still trying. That July, I flew to the Bay Area to speak at a national tech inclusion summit. I shared the stage with CEOs, senators, and founders whose companies had millions in funding. I had no VC money, no MBA. But when I spoke about empathy, about design for dignity, about the strength it takes to try again at 75 years old, the room went quiet. Then they stood up to clap, not because I was flashy, but because the truth hits harder when it's personal. Afterward, a woman came up to me, early 40s, blazer, notebook, quiet confidence. I've followed your work for a while, she said. I didn't know your story. I just knew your impact. I didn't ask how she knew. I just thanked her and moved on. That was the magic now. I didn't need everyone to know, just the right people. Back home, things stayed quiet, and for once I liked it that way. My mom called more often, not to give advice, just to check in. She'd tell me about her book club, or ask for help updating her iPad, or mention an article she saw about BrightLoop just randomly popping up in her newsfeed. I knew she bookmarked the link. I never said it. Marco and I weren't suddenly best friends, but there was warmth now, recognition. He sent me a podcast one day and said, "You should be on this. You've got more to say than most of their guests." That meant something, even if it wasn't everything. The truth is, we don't always get full closure, but we can get enough to exhale. And that's what I had now. Air in my lungs, space in my chest, clarity in my days. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building a life that didn't need it. By August, our team had grown to 8. We had a project manager named Priya who kept everyone on track like it was her calling, a part-time UX specialist who used to design museum exhibits, a retired engineer who volunteered once and never left. BrightLoop wasn't just a product anymore, it was a community. And we were planning our biggest push yet, a nationwide initiative focused on rural senior populations. We called it First Click, because sometimes that's all it takes. One morning, I was at the office reviewing grant proposals when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Hi," the voice said, warm and familiar. "Is this Ava?" "Yes." "This is Elena Alvarez. I'm Talia's aunt. I met you at the engagement dinner." I paused. "Hi." "Yes, I remember." "I wanted to thank you. My father, Talia's grandfather, he talked about you before he passed. Not by name, but about how someone gave him back his Sundays." I didn't speak, just listened. He told me once, "This girl made me feel human again, and I've never forgotten that." I swallowed. "Thank you for telling me." We hung up a few minutes later. I sat there at my desk, blinking at my calendar like it might explain how life could bend and twist like this, how the most unexpected people could carry your legacy forward. At Marco and Talia's anniversary party later that year, I brought a small gift. It wasn't fancy, just a USB drive and a handwritten note in a small blue box. Inside the drive was a custom-built version of BrightLoop for the assisted living community where Elena volunteered. No subscription, no limitations, just lifetime access. And the note? For the ones who were never too old to keep learning, and the ones who helped them believe it. Talia hugged me for a long time. She didn't cry, but her eyes were glassy when she pulled back and whispered, "Thank you for being someone I didn't know I needed to know." That hit me in a place I didn't know I was still protecting. Weeks later, I taped another quote to my fridge, right below the first. "Some connections outlast the silence. Simple. Quiet. True." That night, I stood in my kitchen, barefoot, lights low, sipping chamomile tea and reading through another round of BrightLoop testimonials. One came from a man in Arizona, Vietnam vet, 74. He'd never touched a smartphone before last year. Now he was teaching classes at his local library. "You didn't just help me get online. You helped me remember I still have something to offer." I closed my laptop and stood there for a long time. Not proud, not triumphant, just full. Full of the life I'd made out of broken pieces, full of gratitude for the people who found me before the world did, full of peace I'd earned without anyone's permission. That was the revenge. Not the clapping, not the recognition, the peace, the quiet joy of having built something no one could take from me, something born from pain, but grown with purpose, something real. And maybe that's the lesson I wish someone had told me sooner. They'll give you a label: failure, quitter, disappointment. Wear it if you want. Or build something so powerful they have no choice but to come looking for your name. Either way, keep going. Because your story, it's not over yet. If this story touched you, subscribe to Secret Revenge, because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming, just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed, rising, brilliant, and unshaken. See you in the next story.